And ride with me in my foul life.
We got another one coming at you, Foul Life Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you again by our friends at Gerber Gear. Stay Sharp America. You know we depend on Gerber for everything from blind building to cutting that breast meat off of a mallard duck, a speckle-bellied goose, or those hindquarters off a Rocky Mountain elk, a mule deer, a whitetail deer. We love to live off the land. We love to hunt. We love to fish. We love to eat wild. Gerber Gear supports our culture, our lifestyle. We depend on Gerber. Today's episode of the Foul Life Podcast is also brought to you by our friends out of the great state of Tennessee, Final Flight Outfitters, for all of your shooting, fishing, hunting, turkey hunting, deer hunting, waterfowl hunting, duck hunting, goose hunting needs. It's owned by the Powers brothers. They are royalty in the waterfowl industry. And today we have one of the Powers brothers back on the show. We love having Mr. Kelley Powers. My brother, how are you?
I'm good, buddy. How's everything?
It's good, buddy. It's good. It's weird because it's supposed to be a foot of snow on the ground out where I live in the mountains, and it's 70 degrees almost today, and it's March 3rd.
Let me tell you something even weirder than that. Is, of course, where I live in Tennessee, we don't get much snow. But 10 days ago, we had about 10 inches of snow on the ground, and right now it is 4 in the afternoon and 63 degrees. Just crazy swing of weather.
It's nuts, man. It's so crazy. Did y'all have a good winter for the duck season?
No, we didn't. Honestly, it was typical good cold snap November, first cold snaps of the year, push ducks in. December gets really stagnant, a lot of still weather days, not much wind, and relatively mild. Carries on into January with just a little mild cold front here and there, nothing crazy. And then February hits and just a massive Arctic blast, and when season's over.
So did you have some of those sun-shining mallards in your dish days? Did you get to experience a couple at least?
Yeah, I mean, we had some of those days, but not your prototypical, to really have that effect, you need that in December, at least here. You're getting those ducks coming right down the flyway that are fresh. A lot of times if it happens, or very rarely does it happen after the 10th of January. Those, from my experience, anything past the 10th of January, unless it's just an extreme cold weather event, the ducks just wait it out. They'll hunker down and they'll wait as long as they can. And if they get a deep snowfall and a cold weather event on top of it, well, it'll move some around. But it's got to be something significant. If it's just a good cold blast one day and calm the next, we just don't see it anytime after the middle of January. Now, if that happens in December, it's amplified. You're more likely to get a good bit of birds pushed in.
Being where you're at, kind of in the mecca of waterfowling, Reelfoot Lake area, you got Arkansas close by. You have Southeast Missouri, aka the Boot Hill, close by. You got the Mississippi Delta. You're not far from any of that. What were you hearing as a whole around that it truly is the waterfowl capital of the continental United States, per se. I know you can go to North Dakota and get them. I know you can go to Montana and get them, but that's where the mallards are come December. What were you hearing as a whole?
Honestly, it's very alarming in a negative way. A lot of people are very concerned on our duck migrations, more particularly our mallard migrations. We're not seeing the numbers at all. And the aerial surveys back that up. The data supports it, especially Arkansas Game and Fish. Their aerial counts are less than half of the long-term average. Like it's substantial. And there's a lot of, contributing factors, how, the last 2 years, not including this year, but the previous 2 years before this year, there was a high water event. The Mississippi River was out, the White River, the Cat, all of those tributaries were pretty much out of their banks for a large percentage of the season. So what that really did is it kind of disguised the poor duck hunting season for us. Cause a lot of people would contribute the lack of seeing birds as, a lot of birds are scattered. That much water, it just scatters the ducks. And that, common sense will tell you that. This year wasn't the case. This year was relatively a drought and which you would think would congregate large quantities of waterfowl, and they just weren't there. What ducks you did get, as soon as they arrive, they will not leave their safe haven until after dark. And if you don't have any type of weather event to stir them around, they're not going to happen. But even what birds are there, it's very poor in numbers, and that's alarming. There's a lot of different contributing factors to that. I think pressure is probably the number one contributing factor. I think as a Mid-South duck hunter, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror long and hard and think about how we hunt. Sitting in a blind from daylight to dark and pounding on them. The days of seeing traffic, at least in my particular area, the days of just hunting traffic every day, you got to be in a unique area to do that, and to have success. We do have some private farms that we hunt on, and the best amount of success that we've seen is to manage it, appropriately. Whereas when I get ducks in November, I need to depend on hunting those ducks until till the end of season. I know that's a kind of a hard to do, but it makes you think. Where we go in and we may hunt certain properties only once a week, and dare not leave decoys out. Leaving a decoy out, and when you're not hunting, is educate them almost as much as shooting into them. When they're flying over those decoys 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and let's not kid ourselves. If we were to see how many times a duck flew over our same spread, I think it would alarm us. And when you're hunting, especially private farms, and you see 4 ducks or come in, or 3 gray ducks or this or that, 3 hours later, you see 3 gray ducks and then 4 pintails. You don't have to see that too many times. You realize we're working the same ducks that we saw at 7 o'clock this morning. So constantly changing things. And for us, picking our decoys up when we hunt, setting up in a different location, letting the farm set for several days, trying to hold those ducks, yes, you're not getting the hours setting of hunting season long, but the times you are out there is a more quality hunt.
So as a whole, that part of the country is not experiencing the duck hunting that we read about in Wildfowl or Ducks Unlimited, 99, 2000 timeframe?
It's, as a general statement, no, it is not. And I'm just being truthful. Not saying you can't have a good hunt. That's not the case. I mean, obviously you can, but it is alarming to see the lack of mallard numbers in the Mid-South compared to, 2 years ago, or even let's just go to the long term, the 10-year average. When the counts don't support it, there's something there. And there's a lot of speculation that, pressure is our migrations are shifting further west, the Central Flyway. And I mean, let's face it, Central Flyway duck, Mississippi Flyway duck, they all run together in the Dakotas. At what point does that duck decide to go in the Central Flyway versus down the Missouri River and dump into the Mississippi? Well, then I don't know, but at some point they do that. And I think you would have to be naive to think that the pressure in the Mississippi Flyway is not a contributing factor, because at some point I think it is, and there's so many farms now and private landowners that hunt, and even though and a lot of them hunt every day, and just in West Tennessee alone, you get on an aerial photo and you see the amount of spreads and permanent blinds and people that are hunting every day. It's just, times are changed, times are different. And we, in the last couple of years, we're not seeing what we call traffic ducks that are just flying the bottom, mingling from point A to point B. You just don't see that. And I think why you don't see that is because every time they leave the refuge going to another refuge, between point A and point B, they're called at, they're harassed, they're shot at, they see spread after decoys. So we're training them to just sit tight on the refuge until after dark, and they become nocturnal. And the more you're breeding that into them, then that's kind of what we're evolved into. And the only way to alleviate that is to take a long look in the mirror of how we hunt and change up how we hunt. Instead of sitting in a blind all day, maybe pick your decoys up, maybe do something different, maybe, and I don't know the right answer. I wish I did, but I do compare it to some of our private farms and some of the private landowners that are managing their resource. They're not out there every single day, and they're still having quality hunts, but they're not, it's less number of days, but the days they do go out there, it's a fresh decoy spread, and it's a relatively a better successful hunt per hunter.
So as much as you love duck hunting, Kelley, does this force a mid-Southern man like yourself to go to where the ducks are and find them wherever they're at? Now, I know that you work in the industry. I know that you co-host a TV show with Higdon Outdoors. I know that you own a duck and goose call company called Power Calls. And like I mentioned, a great store and outfitter called Final Flight. You don't like to leave home, Kelley. Is this forcing you to get out there and find them?
Yeah. It is. It does. I mean, when unfortunately in our part of the country, I mean, it's very hard to freelance. You can't go and just drive around and see birds in an area and call, because A, it would be rare to find them, and B, if they are there, well, then that guy is planning on hunting his own farm. He developed it, and it's just reality. You're not going to be able to knock on a door and get permission. It's just the nature we're at, because those ducks are hitting that particular body of water for a reason, and it was built by a landowner that hunts. And that's, so that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But at the end of the day, we become more efficient. Our gear's gotten better, our calling's gotten better, our decoys have gotten better, and it doesn't matter what brand you blow or you like. It's just the truth. And I think at some point, I don't know how long it can sustain, to where we have to sometimes manage our resource a little differently and not put as much pressure on them, whether you bounce around or you hunt different locations, if you have the luxury of doing that. But at some point, I think 20 years from now, we'll look back on this conversation and you think, hey, maybe there's something there. I hope not. But this season of all seasons in my whole life, it's made me take a long look of kind of how we hunt some of our farms. However, there are some locations, river hunting, this or that, to where you're always hunt what we call traffic ducks. You're always hunting ducks from point A to point B, and you can let it set for 30 days and you're never going to gain anything. You're never going to let it build up. It's never. So in that scenario, if you're always hunting traffic, constant changing up, you may be hunting from the same location, but constant changing up of decoy spreads, just something new and something fresh can sustain it. But some places that are farms to where they're feeding on, or whether it's a flooded agricultural field or something, in those scenarios, man, it can't sustain, just pounding the ducks daylight to dark.
When you start talking about those river spots and running that traffic, back when you and I were competing against each other and traveling and forming our friendship, Barney Califf had some videos out there at the time of big Missouri wads of mallards, right? Do you think that still happens in those areas? We don't need to give that area away, but do you think it still happens? No.
Yeah, I mean, and and that's the thing. There are unique spots like that everywhere in the country that you can still go and have good hunts. But at the end of the day, in a sense, you're chasing them. You're doing the time scouting, and to me, that's duck hunting. You're putting the time of where the birds actually want to be. You slip in the next day or hours later, under the disguise of darkness, and you set up, and it's a surprise attack. That to me, that's duck hunting. What I'm getting at is the traditional spots, like in Tennessee, is you have a private farm, you build a private farm up, you build impoundments, you build a blind, and it's a stationary blind. You hunt from that stationary blind, stationary decoys. You're depending on the ducks just to fly by you like a deer walks by a certain trail in the rut. That's how a lot of duck hunting is done, at least in the state of Tennessee and Kentucky, in the Mid-South. That's just a fact. The further elsewhere you get, different parts of the country, there's a lot more chasing. There's a lot more scouting. And I'm not saying there's not scouting in Tennessee. That's not an absolute statement. But as a general rule, Tennessee's known for stepping in a big duck blind and this and that. And it's just the way it is. And however, when the ducks are flying, man, you can have great hunts, and it's a good time. It's a social event. You cook for people and all that. I'm just concerned from a long-term standpoint, and I wish I knew the answer. It's just from a long-term standpoint, I don't know how long that model can sustain, keep having good hunts, because you're just, at some point, the ducks just become nocturnal, and they don't want to leave the refuge because they're constantly being harassed when they're going from point A to point B. It's just a different dynamic.
In my opinion, Powers, you're kind of a rarity, meaning that you you grew up in a duck heavy location, a duck rich environment, but you weren't too far from very, very strong Canada goose hunting, whether it was Southern Illinois. You were very tight with the late, great Tim Grounds that we talked about on this podcast before. You've traveled the world, including Canada, hunting Canada geese. Most Southern men or mid-Southern men, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi Delta, really aren't Canada goose hunters. So is there an opportunity for the Canada goose to save a season that you see? Was the Canada goose hunting good in places to where you knew it should be good? Did you get in on some unbelievable flocks of Canada geese working a dry field spread or a water spread?
No.
Wow.
Short answer, no. And that's,
Wow.
I mean, it's an easy answer. And that's what's alarming is because, listen, the Canada goose migration in the Mississippi Flyway is a story in itself, and it's a very sad tragedy in a sense. Crab Orchard, Horseshoe Lake, those traditional areas that would winter, up to 300,000-400,000, 500,000 birds. It's over. I mean, I looked at the count, and this is awful, but a friend of mine texts me, around like last week, and of course we're in the month of February, and now when we're recording this, but refuge we had more on one of our private farms of residents here in Tennessee than what they had on the whole refuge. Like, it's just sad. Like, and for years we've always thought it like, it's one thing to have that happen, but wait till it happens to our mallards and the Arkansas, Tennessee boys, Mississippi boys, Louisiana boys. That's when they'll really they'll have an uproar. And goodness, it's sad. And here's the thing that ought to be an eye opener to everybody. Throw out everything. Ducks can become nocturnal. No doubt, that's hard to track a little bit. But even numbers sometimes on ducks on refuge, it might be debatable. You may say, well, there's more on private farms or not on the refuges as much, so the counts are skewed. Okay, possibly. But the number one thing I can say, if you're a Mid-South duck hunter, explain to me the explosion of the specks, white-fronted geese in central Missouri and central Illinois. When they're getting way above their counts in mid-December of specks than normal, and it's a trend over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years, getting more and more and more, well, those, it's common sense to me, just with our mallards, that they're not wintering as farther south anymore. It's just not happening. Pressure, whatever you want to call it, we understand the mallards is one dynamic of it. We can look at our mallard counts and you can see, hey, they're just not migrating as further south anymore. That's one thing. But our specks always would winter in southern Louisiana. That's where they're going. Arkansas, that area. But when you're seeing an explosion of numbers and speck hunting in central Illinois, central Missouri, normally they just wouldn't have that kind of numbers, especially mid-December. But when you read the counts and the biologist reports, it's an asterisk there. They're more and more seeing, and that's just I think it makes sense with every other species of ducks that we're hunting.
So is the short answer a combination of weather patterns and very, very mild winters mixed with the flooded corn outburst in the northern part of this country, mixed with refuges, Kelley? Is those three the main combining factors that are keeping a migratory bird from getting to Louisiana when traditionally he or she would?
Yeah, I think I'm not the kind of guy to say, oh, too many people are flooding corn. Well, listen, they don't. Unless they've got, it's impossible. When it gets down below, 20 degrees, unless you have a hot water discharge, I'm not talking ice blasters or any kind of electrical propulsion, it's going to freeze. You got to have stinking some kind of hot, you're talking about a power plant, a nuclear power plant or a warm water discharge power plant, something to keep that from freezing. So just because somebody floods corn in central Illinois, it's eventually going to freeze. There's only so much you can do when it gets down and you look at their weather, their air temperatures, it's going to freeze. However, if that duck can fly to a power plant lake, and anybody just get on Google Earth, go up the Illinois River Valley and just start looking, you'll see a little smokestack and you'll see a little zigzag line, the intake, and you'll see the discharge. From here all the way to Chicago, the amount of power plants that use water to cool their engines, and then they're discharging that water at a warmer temperature than what it was intaked. Well, eventually they got, like at Braidwood, when Chicago gets cold, where do all the geese go? They go to the nuclear power plant lake at Braidwood, just south of Chicago. Every Canada goose in 4 counties just pile up there. It'll never freeze. It's not going to freeze. And then they can get a foot of snow if they fly out to the field, and there's, with no-till farming is another contributing factor. And this, I don't know if we went through this before, but I'll go through it briefly. The surge of power plants and warm water discharge, the no-till farming, when the farmers in the fall normally would disc up their fields and preparing it for the spring planting, now they don't touch it. So they leave that corn stubble standing. If there's any excess grain that come out of the back of the combine, now it's just laying on top of the ground, okay? So now you got excess feed that's available for them, and you got open water that'll never freeze. Then if we have the warm weather to where you're not getting at least 10 inches of snow on the ground to where that goose or duck can't nose in and get that accessible feed, and we're not getting the snow amounts historically in the month of December like we used to. So when you don't get that, now that bird has, fields to feed in, less snow to obstruct them to get to the food source. The fields aren't being turned under. They constantly have open water source at some of these cooling lakes, and then from a Canada goose aspect, the reintroduction of the giant Canada goose, especially in areas like Chicago, which is straight up the flyway for us. When you have our migratory goose, and this has been going on for 20 years. So-and-so migratory goose that comes out of James Bay, he flies over 1 million of his buddies that look like him, talk like him, act like him. He thinks they're him. But technically, they're a different subspecies of the Canada goose. When they intermingle with them, when it gets cold, those giants and residents, they're genetically designed not to migrate, and they're used to the harsh weather. So when you have a cold snap and a snowfall or whatever it is, they go to the warm water discharge plant. They're training the migratory geese of where to go. The weak die off, the strong survive. Spring comes, they fly back to the nesting grounds. You can see where this is evolving. They never have a reason to go any farther south unless it's legitimately life-threatening. And we just don't see those type of weather events. So all in all, there's a lot of contributing factors there. That, in my opinion, I think that's exactly where we're at on our Canada geese. I don't think you see that as much in the Mississippi flyway, is because when you go up into Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, you don't have a lot of those urban areas where we're getting warm water discharge, and nor do you have a river system that's using a lot of cooling, from a lot of industrial standpoints. So I think you have some of that kind of can go on, but it's just a disturbing trend that I think a lot of it's man-made. But I don't know the answer to combat it other than travel.
Well, without giving away too much, Kelley Powers, if you could tell somebody a piece of advice on where to go to have a successful Canada goose hunt, or if somebody called the store and says, "Hey, I'm looking to go on a Canada goose hunt, can you recommend an outfitter or a location in the country?" Where would you send them right now? Canada doesn't count.
That's a good question. I mean, oh man, come on. No, Canada is a bucket list, and they're different. There's places in Canada. People ask me, "Hey, I want to go to Canada." First thing I ask them, "What do you want to shoot? You want to shoot big geese or little geese?" Because it's a difference. I mean, you go to some parts of the country, you're never going to shoot a big honker, and you're going to get those. You know how it is. And I ask them those things, and I would ask them the same thing here. If they want to shoot a Canada goose, really Chicago, northern Chicago area is still strong. They'll still have some good early season stuff, and granted it's mild, and they'll get a lot of early migrators that come through. You can still have good hunting. Rochester, Minnesota is, highly pressured, but it breeds very good goose hunters. That area right there, Fargo, same deal. Rochester, that Minneapolis area, there's a lot of good goose hunting in there, and there's some pretty good goose hunters, and there's some good friends of ours too, that you can happen. But, also too, sometimes you got to think outside the box and go where there's less pressure. The places I mentioned are great hunting, great hunters, but there also is a lot of pressure, and they'll admit to that. Upstate New York, there's good hunting. Out west, Montana, good hunting. I mean, it doesn't find you a good outfitter that's reputable, that has good gear, and just start researching that. And that's probably where you can get your best quality hunting. And I recommend going through an outfitter, just because some of these places you can freelance. But 9 times out of 10, if you have a little inside track on an outfitter, sometimes you'll end up spending less than trying to knock on doors and doing it yourself. And I mean, it's a struggle.
So are you in so many words, Kelley Powers, telling me that there is no problem or no reason not to hunt with an outfitter, a qualified outfitter? It doesn't mean that you're not a good hunter, right? They just take a lot of the guesswork out, right? Is it okay to go and learn from them? Is it okay to go on a guided hunt?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm going hunting, at the end of the day, and at my age, granted, I'll go and I know the place to go, but sometimes it's okay to just not have to worry about putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. And if you're going for a 5-day trip and you're doing it yourself, you may get 2 or 3 days of good hunting out of that. Where if you went with the outfitter, you may get 5 days of good hunting. So you have to analyze your time and what that's worth, and that, because at the end of the day, the time spent scouting is more important than any type of call-in or decoys that you're carrying with you. And unless you're there weeks before you arrive or before you're going to hunt, it's hard to put the pieces of the puzzle together on a freelance trip. And me and you both travel the world, and you do this. And me, and I dare to say it's the same for you as well. No matter where I go, if I'm freelancing, my better hunting is on the tail end of my trip than it is when I get there. Because when I get there, we'll have a couple good hunts early on, but get better until I put all the pieces of the puzzle together and start narrowing in on patterns and trends and tendencies of where the birds are at and what's going on. And every year it changes. Every day it changes. But the more you're there, you can kind of forecast those trends and be in the right spot. And for me, it doesn't happen until later on in the trip. And I think most guys that freelance will back that up to say, yeah, it's better towards the end. So it's one of those things, you analyze it. If there's a good reputable outfitter there, and you get to know well, then sometimes it may be better, more money better spent to go with him, support the local business, and make a good friend out of it, and kind of go that route.
Most people know you as a short reed Canada goose caller. You hunt ducks a lot where you live in Tennessee. You've also been very, I guess, successful on stage with a duck call, mainly meat calling, real duck calling, not necessarily Main Street Stuttgart style with the big hail calls at the beginning and all of that, but mostly meat duck. I've competed against you in meat duck all the way back in like 2002, 2003. We were competing against each other in meat duck as well as goose. Kelley, do you blow a duck call a lot when you hunt? You're in places where you're hunting traffic ducks sometimes, but you also are hunting managed farms like we talked about earlier. It's easy to pick up a goose call and run it, as far as when you become very proficient with it and you can pick it up and you can make some noise and keep Canada geese interested. Is it more important not to call or knowing when to call with mallard ducks as opposed to Canada geese, or is it about the same for both?
Probably about the same for both. The most important thing that I would say out of all of this, it's more important of when to call and how to call, or more important than when to call than how you sound. And to a certain degree, I'm not saying go just be crazy on the call, but you just have to read birds, and there's just, you have to read them, knowing when to call, because man, if they're coming to you, it's a big pet peeve of mine on things, the way people call, hitting ducks at the wrong time. For example, and every location you hunt is different. It doesn't matter where you're at. And truthfully, guys that hunt one setup every day of duck season, and for years, you still learn things after so many years. That tree that's in front of us, just to the left, if it's a west-northwest wind, you need to let them get to the right side of it before you hit them. Like all those little intricate details, you don't find out of just pulling up to a spot and hunting today. You may not find that out till 3 years later. Like it's just if we would do a better job of recording data on west-northwest winds, exactly you know what I mean? If you had more of a analytical approach to it, kind of like, the NFL does right now on what plays to call and trends and tendencies. Like if we were to analyze that, I think it would shorten the learning curve. But no matter where you set up, everything acts a little different, with the wind and how they go. And it drives me crazy of people hitting ducks at the wrong time. Like, man, if you got a big tree or an obstacle, especially if you're in a timber hole and there's a tall tree that they need to skirt around, if they need to go to the right side of it and they're flying straight away from you and they're starting to lean left, don't dare hit the call. If you even breathe into that call and they're starting to lean left, of course, they're going to swing back to the left. And already because of previous trends, if they're on the left side of the hole, they're not going to finish right, especially of how the wind is. So if they're going away from you and they're just slightly leaning left, like nobody better even call. But as soon as you see one duck in there that turns his head to the right, if you capitalize on that opportunity, then you've got all the ducks set up in a format and in a position to where they can actually finish. And at the end of the day, if you were to analyze every flock of ducks that you're working and realize that every time they fly over you is a missed opportunity, okay? You've only got 3-4 passes. Whatever that number is, if you always think of that mentality, you try to capitalize on every opportunity, if that makes sense, because only so many times they're going to fly over you and they're gone. So if you try to minimize those and take advantage of that and kind of have that mindset, what you do is you train yourself not to just blow the call, just to blow the call, just hear yourself calling. And so many people just like to hear themselves calling and not thinking, okay, those ducks have already passed me 2 times. Probably only got 1 or 2 more times. When they go over my head, I better be watching them because I better make this count, and that's the mentality that I'm always in. It's just kind of ingrained in my mind of, that. And it goes back to whoever's calling in your group or in your hunting party, you got to have one pit boss. He's the guy that's leading the calling. And as those ducks go over your head and it's silent, nobody better ever hit a call until that person calls, because that's the guy that should be watching for those trends and those tendencies, and however they're going to finish, it's all about putting them in that position to where they can finish into your setup. And if they're starting to swing left and it's going to be with a crosswind and they can't finish that way, well, then don't call at them to put them in that location. Wait till they get it right to when you can be in a position that that they're going to land.
So when you said a few minutes ago that some of your best trips, the tail end of them, are your better hunts because you figure out the roost, the loafs, the patterning, what time of day, the weather, the forecast, you might have it figured out a little bit by then. I assume that calling is part of this, Kelley, and where I'm going with that is if you leave your house in Tennessee and you and Kyle and the crew go up to, let's say, Montana, and you're hunting a buckbrush hole in Montana in December, can you, if you can call mallard ducks in Tennessee, can you call them in Montana, no problem? Or does it take you a couple days to figure out where those trees are and those bushes and those embankments or something that's going to change that flight pattern to the duck or the way they set up into your spread?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You can, be effective anywhere, and any hunter can do that. You just, the main thing is in the back of your mind, it baffles me about how many waterfowl hunters just don't know instantly the wind direction. And I don't know, I guess it's just something, the more you do it, and you're just ingrained into where I constantly know exactly where they're going to finish right here today. It's just, you don't even guess. You just know, you can feel it coming off your right shoulder, the wind. Right here's where they're going to be, not here, right here. You know that just because you're standing up out of the blind. And it kind of baffles me about how hunters, it just doesn't register to them. It doesn't come into play. But for me, I know, all right, if they're going to finish right here, that means they have to set up somewhere just a little to the left of that location as they're swinging in. So they're probably not going to swing out to the right side. They need to swing out to the left side. All that information just processes real quick, no matter where you're at in the country. If you're in a timber hole or a buckbrush slough in Montana, then what comes into play is, okay, what obstacles downwind are going to prevent that duck or goose from coming into my spread? Is it a tree? Is it tall buckbrush? Is it dry ground? That's why you just kind of look at all those things and you see where you want the ducks to finish. And you're, in a sense, it's like you're trying to land a plane. Where's my runway going to be? That's where they need to call to where they can get to where they have that long approach to come in. And it's just seeing those little details. And for us here, when you're hunting a spot every single day for all season long, if you're, a permanent spread, you still see trends. And a lot of that's just slight wind changes. I mean, these are very intricate details. And I know your timber hunters in Arkansas will vouch for this. You don't really know those things until you really spent, just days and days and days hunting the same exact location under different conditions, and not just wind conditions, water. When every inch of water changes everything. I hunt on the river a lot, and you get an inch more of water or two or a foot of water. Goodness, the flyways change. They may be crossing you today. Tomorrow they're half a mile north of you crossing, and the only difference is an inch higher of water. Well, they're just following the water line. All that little stuff is just different details that come in to where you'd give anything to have a guy just recording all this data from an analytical approach. And then, 5 years from now, you start looking at 5 years of data. You can say, okay, this is exactly what they're going to do today because we have this much data to back it up. But right now, that obviously doesn't exist, and we're all just processing in our minds and in our memory bank and going from there. But if you hunt a spot every day, the guys that do that they'll appreciate, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just things change. And I love going into a spot and hunting different areas with guys I've never hunted before that they hunted every day. And they'll tell you, yep, you see them big trees over there, generally on a wind, they're going to swing to the right side of them. And if the wind's coming right at them, they got to go left or right of it, but they finish better if they go right of it, because you'll have those times. And there's some spots on private farms that we have some of them big trees that I still want to go up. I want to climb them and top them so it's no longer an obstacle, where they can get in there a little quicker on those northwest wind days. But that goes into changing kind of the topography of your surroundings and where you hunt. But a lot of that's too private farms, where you can go in and do those things. But all in all, just be aware of all those, there's so much data that is passing throughout the hunt. Just be aware of what's going on and try to remember as much as you can for the next time you're there.
How do you apply that to your decoys? When you're hunting a spot like a private farm like you're talking, I would assume you're probably not picking your decoys up every day and putting them away. You probably have a spread, but you do change them depending on that wind. You're gonna open up a hole here or there potentially. But what do you tell somebody that comes into Final Flight, Kelley Powers, and says, what do I need? Like when you go to Montana, you don't carry 100 dozen floating mallard decoys, do you? I mean, how do you process the decoy part of the game?
So, visibility is key. I'm a big fan of the large size battleships that, the great big decoys. And granted, you can go more numbers with a smaller decoy, but when a duck can see a decoy at a higher altitude, they'll have tunnel vision a lot of times. No matter, you've seen it before, they won't look at anything else because that's what they saw first, and they can't see that if you're running small size decoys. So I like the biggest decoy you can get and as many as you can afford. That's, that way they can see you at farther distances. And once they start pitching, well, then you got them. If they're not pitching and they're not flying over, you're not going to have a chance. So whatever you can get them to start pitching, whether it's more flashers, whether it's whatever it is, larger size decoys there. From a decoy standpoint and how you set up, I'm a huge fan of sunlight. Sunlight is key, for years, and still people, it's common trend to set up in the shadows, in the shade, just because you can hide easier and use the natural shadows that are there. And that is true. You can hide easier. The drawback of setting up on the east side of the hoe, number one, in the Mid-South predominantly, you always have westerly winds, southwest, west, northwest. Constantly, ducks are going to be coming in from behind me, okay? Number two, if you set up on the east side of the hoe, just about majority of my decoys that are close are not visible because, so many times guys will say, hey, I hunt this timber hoe, but we don't really start killing them in there until after 8:30, 9 o'clock. Well, it has nothing to do with the hoe. It's a visibility issue. It's something is obstructing sunlight penetrating that water inside the hoe before 9 o'clock. So it could be a tall tree line edge on the east side of the hoe, whatever. So if your water's not visible, and more importantly, if your decoys aren't visible, you might as well just leave them in the boat. If they can't see the decoys, you're not going to, they're just coming to the call in a lot of sense. And it's a lot of reasons too. Your timber hunters, they'll go in with just a few decoys and they'll kick water, and a lot of that, especially on a sunny day, those ducks can hear the water and they can see the motion of the water. They see that before they could ever see a decoy because of the natural shadows that are on the water. So me personally, I like to go the contrary. I like to set up on the west side of the hoe. Now, granted, I want to set up the way my wind is first and foremost. But generally, if I'm setting up a permanent spread that I'm going to hunt day in, day out, by setting up on the west side of the hoe, now south winds, southwest winds, west winds, northwest winds, north wind, I'm pretty good unless I have an east wind, which is very rare in this part of the country. So by doing that, my wind's always going to be great. I'm going to be shooting it in my face, or I'm going to have a crossing wind. Then number two, the sunlight is always going to be shining on my decoys. If the sun's out, every decoy I have will be in the sunlight and be visible. And when you put that combination together, it's great. The drawback of that, well, they can see the hunters easier. Well, that's something I feel like I can control. I can control how I'm concealed. I can't control the sun and where it shines, but I can control how my blind is brushed or my hide is set up. So we just go overboard and try to be as concealed as best we can, be in the right position to finish ducks with the winds at our back, and the sunlight shining on our decoys, and it seems to be our best prescription.
When you said that one of your pet peeves is the timing of the callers in the blind and how it will literally drive you crazy, and I agree. Comes from experience, yeah. I get that. But talk to me about this. What about the anxiety and pure just freaking out that you see or witness with other hunters when the ducks don't work when the sun's not up? And you're like, we got to move the decoy spread. We got to do this. I'm like, guys, we got to get light. It's got to get bright. The water doesn't look right now. The decoys don't look right now. Let's let the sun do its job, right?
That's absolutely.
It's like
and
panic.
There's things you can control and things. It is a panic, and there's things you control and things you can't. And I'm a huge fan of sunlight. I don't care where you are in the country. Now granted, if I'm out in a wide open field, you may not see the birds fly out as much because they like to get their feet muddy. And if it rains, you're going to generally, at least this part of the area, you have more success. But I love sunlight, man. It makes natural shadows. It makes decoys pop. They can see ripple on the water. It's just all of the above. That's just my favorite style to hunt, and from a calling standpoint, it's just different things of just reading them and not over calling and at the end of the day, it's not how you sound. And I'll have some guys that'll come in there that are great callers and I'll just say, hey, hit them. Like, I'm not going to call. Just don't call. Whoop, don't call. Wait. Oh, he's getting ready to turn right. Get ready. Boom, hit it right now. Boom. And as soon as they hit him, it breaks the duck's back. And it doesn't really matter how good that caller sounded. He just hit him at the right opportune time. And now that duck is in a position to where he could finish into our setup. If he hit that duck too early, that duck would have swung left, would not be in a position to finish that swing. Now we lost a swing and we got to start the whole process over again. And in the back of my mind, like I would tell him, you've only got so many swings you're going to give you. Make every single one of them count. Don't hit a duck or call it a duck when it's going to put them in a position to where they cannot finish. And just always think about that mindset. And then, so it's not necessarily how you sound. It's just when you're calling and when you're hitting them.
But one thing is for sure that you're going to get a way better reaction when there's brightness and color and shine on the water, yeah. Right? That's everything.
No doubt. It's everything. Not that it puts you in a better mood. I love hunting in the rain out in the field. They like to go out there, and especially in a pit or if you're in a layout blind or whatever kind of setup you're in, but just puts me in a better mood when when it's not pouring down raining and it's pretty sun out, and love to see that, but yeah, sunlight is key for me, especially, and most of your timber hunters will vouch for that as well.
Oh, you could hide an army in trees if it's sunny. If it's gray or a high dome, you might as well pack it in. I mean, I'm not saying you ain't going to get a couple of them, but they're not going to act like ducks. Keith Allen was the best at explaining it is like this. They just don't act like ducks when it's not sunny.
They don't. And Keith and brother Keith, man, I love that guy to death, man. Yeah, he does it. You know, he's another guy too and he told me years ago, he's like, man, I would go in and we'll set up they'll literally walk in with no decoys in some spots that are hunting public, and they'll kick water. And it goes back to that coming to the sound and coming to that water kicking, you know, with especially the sunlight and the shadows. A lot of times you can't see the decoys anyway, you know, and Keith told me that, you know, and I firmly agree with that. Just, I mean, he would, you know, not even necessarily have as many decoys in that scenario, and have success.
I've hunted several locations, including Rainy Breaks and Mingo, and some places with Keith with no decoys, and learned from him that the slapping your thigh or kicking the water. I always thought, well, that water's making the decoys move in a flash. He's like, no, that's the sound ducks make when they're in the woods.
Yeah. How many times too, and answer this, and you'll understand, you know, we so overthink things. And even walking through the spread and looking at things from a human point of view, when you're looking straight out at the water and looking at decoys and how things look, and now with drone technology and being able to fly above spreads, even in off season, and look at things, analyze things from a bird's eye point of view, like, in my opinion, we overthink so much. Because how many times do you get out there, if you're in a boat and you're motoring around and throwing up water and you look back and there's ducks just nodded right on top of you and you're out there in the middle of the boat, but they see that ripple and its activity in the back of their mind, in my opinion, they don't think it's a hunter at all. It's just something moving, and they think, well, it has to be ducks because it's water. It's flooded timber, it's a flooded field, whatever. So it has to be ducks. You know, they're not processing that information that quick that, oh, it's a trap. That's actually a guy in a boat.
Right.
You know, and so many times I think we overthink our decoy spreads, especially when it comes to motion. Like for me, I want as much ripple as I can get. Like not too much when they're trying to finish over it, but like as they're banking, like I want as much. Like, I mean, I want it like an ocean out there where I'm kicking up as much ripple. That way, when they turn back, they can, you know, everything looks to life. And not only that, you know, a decoy on slick water disappears. It's almost a mirror effect. A decoy on rippled water has contrast. And that's, no matter where you are in the world, that's, you know, if you're looking down and it's slick water, they just disappear. If it's got ripple, it's got some contrast and it makes that decoy stand up, which is why whether any type of motion decoy you use or jerk cord, whatever, the more ripple you got, generally the better they're going to finish.
You gotta move. You gotta have movement. You gotta have a jerk string. I hunt over spinning wings. We work with Mojo. I love Mr. Terry Denman, but without ripples on the water, a Mojo can only do so much of getting their attention. When they get close and they're starting to dissect that spread, you know, that ripple is everything. That Jim Ronquist taught me this remember back in the day when we would do the Avery team waterfowl question and answer deals, the all of that stuff. Well, Jim taught me about chocolate milk and about how important it is to stir up the sediments and get that water looking mucky and chocolate milk, right? Because ducks are active. They're always moving. Even when they're sleeping, they're kicking their feet a little bit, right? So they're always churning something up, and that water's never clear. Yep.
If you know, we would scout some of our farms, especially on ducks that are nocturnal, you know, and never see a duck, but know we're holding ducks just because of the color of the water. We'll get out there and the sun will come up, and we don't jump a duck up going in, but you start looking out there and one section of the farm, the water's all muddy. Well, you know, that just didn't happen overnight. I mean, that just didn't happen miraculously. You know, that's where the ducks were sitting that night before, or that something come through and, you know, granted in shallow water impoundments, water that's 18 inches or less, you know, ducks they're, especially mallards, I mean, they're dabbling ducks. They're going down, they're feeding, they're churning up mud. It turns that water muddy. But more importantly, you know, yes, it creates a natural environment. But more importantly, a decoy on muddy water has contrast. A decoy on slick water that's dark in color disappears. You know, that decoy on top of that muddy water jumps out from a long distance.
So a piece of advice would be don't be afraid to get out and run your dog through them or to walk through them yourself and get it set, get it muckied up a little bit, right?
Yep. Yeah. So what we do, like when we get a break in the action every morning, we'll run a boat in the decoys. We actually have boat lanes that we'll run and churn up mud. Now on our private farms, when we harvest, like when we go in and harvest the crops, whatever we have, we will run a disc through areas where we're going to hunt. And the reason it is because by running that plow through that ground, now when we put water on top of it, it's easier for us to churn up mud. So whether walking through it, a dog or whatever, I don't have that, where it feels like concrete under where I'm walking. It's more of a softer cushion. I drag my feet, I can churn up mud easier. It makes my decoy stand up and pop better. So what we'll do is wherever we're hunting, we'll run the disc down and churn up some of that dirt. That way, when we flood it 2 months later, it makes it easier to muddy up our decoys.
I want one more answer real quick, Kelley, before I move into the ending of this, which we're going to talk about something that occurred in your neck of the woods with people you knew that kind of shook up the big time shook up the waterfowl industry. But when you made a comment earlier about river hunting traffic, and then you kind of compared it, or you were talking also in the same sentence and breath about management. If there's those ducks in November, you're going to be hunting in January, you're not going to shoot in to a huge flock and educate them all. But is your mindset that if you're running traffic on traffic days, though, when you get a big wad in there, and I'm talking one of those, what Jimbo calls a Mondo wad, are you shooting into a Mondo wad on a traffic day just because you're not mad at them? I get that, but that's hunting, right? Or how do you think of that?
Historically, no, I haven't. Historically, we have had some of them big groups get in there, and I mean, that's obviously personal preference, and I don't knock anybody for doing that. It's just, there were times that I know one spot that I grew up hunting, and this back when I was a kid, we probably, I don't know, there's 500,000 birds that come in, and it was just and granted, this is a private farm, and it's not on a big flyway. I mean, so this was kind of very abnormal. But man, all of them come in finished, and we even looked at each other and just said, guys, this is, as they were working. And finally, me or my brother, one of us said, hey, look, no matter what happens, we are not going to shoot. Let's just sit back and enjoy this, and to me, granted, I was a little kid, but it was kind of a life lesson. It's not about pulling the trigger. Let's get them in there, get them to finish, and I mean, here I am 20 years later talking about it, and we never even fired a shot into them. But at the end of the day, as they kind of go off, I realize, well, that flock's going to disperse and they're not going to be as big anymore, but somebody else they're not as educated. Now our private farms that we try to hold birds on, never. This year alone, we had right before shooting time, we were there. Goodness, we were there probably in the blind 20 minutes before shooting time, and we're sitting back drinking coffee, and the field's just filling up, and we're waiting on legal shooting time. Well, when legal shooting time got, there were so many ducks on the water, just right outside of range. And then we had ducks that were landing in the decoys. And I just told the guys that we're not going to shoot. Like that's not even going to happen. Let me get out and walk them off. So I just got out of the blind and kind of waited out, let some pick up. Because at the end of the day, as they went to the different parts of the farm and dispersed, then they started nickel and diming and coming back. And it made sense. I'm not going to shoot into them and educate that many ducks, because as soon as you shoot, if you startle them enough, they could leave the whole county. They could leave the whole area and get up to a migrating height and leave. So we just don't do that. I try to manage that a little better.
Same mindset on a traffic day on the Mississippi or on the Illinois. You're gonna let those birds go if it's a 500 wad. I'm not going to say I'm going to do it every time and then we're hunting together and we just crack into them. But on a traffic day, on a river scenario coming out of the north, that's probably a little different. Those ducks, in the back of your mind, the weather conditions, and they've been flying that far. Hey, have fun. I mean, that's what it's about. If you're sitting on a private farm and you're trying to manage that resource and want them to stay there, that's a little different. But at the end of the day, sometimes those river spots, especially if it's current, those ducks aren't going to stay there all the time. They're just coming in for a drink and they're gone. So those scenarios, I mean, every spot's different, and I don't blame anybody for doing it. Like I say, we've all done it, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's hunting. As long as it's done within legal means, do that. It's just,
on private farms and trying to manage them, I try not to generally on some of them big flocks of just shooting into them because, these ducks I want to hold all year.
I take a lot of, probably the biggest complaint about people hunting with me when we're filming, Kelley, is not calling the shot. It's getting caught up in that getting caught up in that majesty, right?
Me too.
They're landing all around me, and I'm just like, man, this is awesome. So I'm with you on it. It's just that, there's different mindsets. If you're managing ducks, or if it's one of those migrator days where that you might not necessarily see those same ducks tomorrow, they're up and down the flyway. They're gone tomorrow south 200 miles. You just I guess you're educating them for the next hunters, or you might be traveling south yourself later on in the season. But man, it's hard not to shoot them. It's hard not to, right? But so Kelley, in your area, is there truth to the story now? Like, there's always been rumors since this happened. I'm referring to the incident at Reelfoot. Is there 100% solid truth to what happened, why it happened, how it happened? Is it true that the two of the people involved that are deceased now worked for you at Final Flight? I wanted to get the story from you because I live so far from Tennessee, but it hit the airwaves right away. What's the truth? Do you know?
Yeah. So, and I want to start off saying this: there is there's an autopsy being done with the TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. It's our state's FBI, or our state police. It's called the TBI here. And so everything I say is very preliminary, and I am not an investigator. And the last thing I want to do is go into speculation. So everything I'm going to tell you is publicly available information that's been released from the district attorney and so on, and that anybody can kind of read. Because I'll tell you this, when the information first came out, and granted, Chance was one of our store employees, and I'll go into the details in a minute. First thing I'll caution our staff and our friends, it's like, guys, we don't know what happened. Nobody does. Fortunately for us, we have great investigators, great police departments. They're going to get to the bottom of it. At the end of the day, lives were lost over duck hunting. And no matter where you are in the country, it's a bad look over a duck. No matter what happened, no matter who's at fault, we don't know. So I say all that to kind of say some of the preliminary results. And as the time of we're doing this, we haven't gotten the final autopsy, back. But from the district attorney was quoted as saying, unless something comes out that's just crazy, unforeseen in the autopsy, this case is pretty much closed shut. So what seemed to happen is, Reelfoot Lake blinds there's blinds that are close together, and there's grandfather blinds, that meaning, years ago, people that owned property next to Reelfoot Lake were kind of grandfathered status into certain blind locations. And one particular blind was grandfathered. Another blind that was close by is what we call a draw blind. So it's a yearly draw that you get the use of the blind for the full season. And just like no matter where you go in the world, there's competition. And unfortunately with Reelfoot, a lot of those blinds, and listen, a lot of those guys are close friends of mine. And unfortunately, there's, just because it was on Reelfoot, it kind of gives them a bad look. But listen, there's some fine people on Reelfoot Lake, and there's some fine duck hunters, and they shouldn't get caught up in a complete random freak accident that everybody's that way, but there are a lot of blinds that are close together. And when you put that many hunters in that close proximity to each other, it creates competition. I don't care where you are in the world. And at the end of the day, it's not duck hunting, in my opinion. Duck hunting doesn't have to be that way. If we all could spread out a little more, we're all going to have better hunting. It's just reality. And you're not going to have the competition and all that. So what it seemed like is the gentleman that deceased, and I won't mention any names, but he was motored over into the blind that Chance Black and Zach Grooms were in. And to all indications, from what I've heard, wanted to hunt with them. And there were reports that he was suffering from dementia. I don't know that. There's some different reports, and hopefully this will come out in the autopsy findings and all that. But from there, he shot him. And whether it was a dispute that happened over a duck that they just shot into, but from everything I've heard is they had no chance. It was a knock on the blind door, guy comes in, and it's just a bad situation, and no matter how you look at it, it's, there were 3 individuals in that blind. The shot 2, the third person was able to get the gun away from him and knock him out, the suspect out into the water. And he was able to get the 2 people, Chance Black and Zach, into the boat and take them to the boat ramp and to try to get them help. And when he looked back, the suspect was standing up. It was about waist deep water, was standing up in the water. And that was the last time they saw him. They found his body 2 days later. And it looked like, by all indications, hypothermia. But, at the end of the day, lives were lost over a duck hunt. Chance was one of our gun department managers, and Zach was his friend, and I don't know how many times actually Chance has hunted this location. He's one that and I know Zach's hunted a little more. I did talk to Jason, the guy that tried to rescue him, and I honestly was reluctant to kind of talk about this, but I can tell you from his standpoint, he shook up, and he told me, and he was an older gentleman and kind of a mentor to these 2 kids, because they were in their young 20s, mid 20s. And like Jason said, he kind of wants to clear his name, and to all indications it has been, but the public perception, so many people raise questions and this and that. And like, I mean, everything I've heard is like, he had heroic efforts of trying to save them. And by seeing the reports that I've seen, I think the investigation kind of backs that up, because he was cleared immediately with law enforcement. And it seems like the story corroborates and all that. But staff that at the end of the day, we don't know. The TBI will release a detailed report and a finding in their autopsies in the days to come. And from there, that'll hopefully give a little bit of closure. But what we want to do as a staff, and not only that, as duck hunters, is to shed light on, at the end of the day, no matter how bad the hunting is, no matter how mad you're upset at the guys hunting over there on the tree line that are maybe shooting your swing or all that, it's over a duck or it's over a goose. And I don't know any of that happened. I just don't know. I'm just stating a reality of being a lifelong duck hunter. We all get upset over certain things, but this ought to pause to where all indications were that guy that was over there in that other spot, he might have had some mental health issues that he couldn't control. And let's be honest, dementia is deadly. It's hard to understand, but they can't control that. And whatever happens, you don't know. I mean, granted, the suspect he grew up in my hometown, just the town right next to mine in Martin. Fine a citizen, fine a family as you could ask for. They had a hardware store. And sometimes you can't control the mental state that dementia puts you can't control that. And for him to going through that, if that's what he was going through, and there's been some things that he was having some health issues, and some things trigger. And so at the end of the day, like, it just puts into perspective that we're all just hunting. This is all a hobby. Nothing should get carried away that far. And, for us, we look back and there's 3 lives lost. And not only that, even the suspect's family, now they have to live with this, and it's unfair for them. It's just we ask for thoughts and prayers for all of them. And, it's just, you talk about a tough time, but I will say the bright side of things. You talk about the hunting industry coming together. When things like that happen, I'm always like, okay, what can I do to help? Whether it's monetarily, everybody's limited within their own means of doing whatever, and for us, it's like, well, we can help monetarily, but then what can we help spread the message about or whatever? Chance and Zach's hometown of Greenfield, Tennessee, they set up a GoFundMe, they set up a fund at the local bank. Well, the bank president happens to be a friend of mine and went to college with my brothers, and we reached out to him and said, hey, is there a way we can do this in electronic form? and so we kind of navigated through that. And just to help, we didn't want to steal their thunder. It was just ways to use our social media presence with Final Flight and push this out. So we started a GoFundMe page, and they just recently closed that, and it raised close to $30,000 to be split amongst the two families. And our goal was, at the end of the day, like, listen, the family shouldn't have the burden of the funeral expenses in this situation. So man, we got stuff from outfitters in Canada to, if it doesn't tell you the support of this industry, and here's one story, and I want to name drop some people because they need to be recognized. But Final Flight, we're obviously a retail store, and we sell sporting goods stuff. Now we're in Tennessee, and we're a member of a buying group, NBS. Also a member of that buying group is Max Prairie Wings. Max is probably one of the largest waterfowl retailers in the industry. The week after that happened, Max provided lunch for our whole staff. Technically, you could say, well, we're competitors. We both sell, but we don't even think like they're our great big brother. We're like tiny compared to them. But for them to recognize this and to provide lunch for our family, I mean, Marion and Chuck and the guy, like, holy cow. You want to talk about just, great people. And not just then, like, it goes like businesses are doing this and different things and reaching out to the Chance and Zach's family and doing different things. Like, it really puts into perspective, like, you may think we have a big industry, the hunting industry, but at the end of the day, we're still small, and everybody is here for each other. And I told our staff at the funeral, we all kind of sat around and it, obviously, and we kind of had some prayers and some thoughts. And I said, everybody grabbed a hand, and I said, look to your left and right, because some point, if you outlive them, the person on your left or right is not going to be there. And if that person on the right is not here, well, then that person on the left is what's going to get you through that tough time. And if they're not there, well, then somebody else is going to get you through that tough time. I said, but don't forget your friends and your family, because that's what gets us through. And, our business, Final Flight Outfitters, we always kind of use it's kind of corny, I guess, but we use the term, faith, family, outdoors in that order, FFO. And we had an award one night, and they asked me to say something, and honestly, it kind of come to me just like in 5 seconds. So like, well, what's Final Flight about? And I was like, well, really, it's faith, family, outdoors. We're strong in faith. We're rooted in our family, and we're all involved in the outdoors. And we try to live our life that way. If we stay grounded and we stay surrounded by good family and friends, and we stay involved in the outdoors, it seems to get us through tough times like this. And the outreach of support in the hunting industry has been phenomenal. And it's definitely helped. I know I can definitely speak from the family's behalf, what they've told me. And it is a very good bright spot in a tragic situation. And that's all that means to us.
Very well said, Kelley. Terrible. I mean, it's the only thing that I question, and it's hard to question something that happens like that, especially after listening to a man like you talk about it. But I've been to Reelfoot, and I know how competitive it is. And I've heard stories about blinds being burnt down because people are shooting swing ducks or dynamite set up in them. I've seen people stand up on the roofs of their blind and yell at another blind from 400 yards away. I've seen it out there, but is it just an assumption that there was swing ducks involved, or did the guy that did survive, the older gentleman, the mentor, did he witness this guy angry or yelling back at them because they were shooting swing ducks? Because if this man had dementia, it sounds like he kind of tricked him by being nice to get up in the blind to try to shoot him. But what was the main reason for that? Was there proof that there was swing duck shot?
From what I understand, and now all this is just, and I don't want to go into speculation, but there has been some time elapsed since this, and any day now we should have a report that comes out. But what I'm gonna speculate, is, and from what I have understand in preliminary reports, is it's kind of been ongoing of just bitterness of a competitor close by. I don't necessarily think there was one instance, and even from ones that told me, like, man, there's never been any type of incidents, all that. Now, granted, TBI report may come back and throw us for a spin. That is possible, and I say that because I'm not an investigator at all that. But it was, I will say, the day that this happened, it was pouring down raining. I mean, it was absolute. I mean, it rained like 2 or 3 inches, and I don't think there was a lot of hunting going on, is what I'm trying to say, and he went to the blind by himself. I've heard there's speculation a lot of this was premeditated, but then again, goodness, like I say,
it's crazy.
You hate to say those things when you just don't know, you know what I mean? And I said the disclaimer on the front end, I'll say it on the back end. The TBI report will hopefully explain everything a little better. I don't know if it's going to make a difference, because at the end of the day, there's 3 lost lives, and the suspect being one of them. Whatever he was going through, whatever happened, it's definitely avoidable, and something that we all can take a look back and say, it's duck hunting. It can be dangerous. Things can happen, but all indications are from the preliminary report, and this is according to the district attorney, that this case is pretty much close to being, closed. And all indications were it was a murder. He motored over to the blind, shot 2 individuals, and then he was knocked out of the blind. Gun was gotten from him. He was knocked out of the blind. And that's where I've gotten my information, because, speculating on different things that happen, I haven't heard that of different swing, but I'm not involved in the investigation to say that, other than reading the final reports or reading what the district attorney says in the paper and all that.
Well, it was Chance and Zach, right?
Correct. Chance Black, Zach Grooms, goodness, mid-20s, life ahead of them. I can go on. Chance has worked for us for around 7 years, and it's hard. I mean, we had a fish fry at our farm shop, and I was cooking fish, and it was for lunch. And I remember, it was like Chance was supposed to be at work at 10 o'clock that morning. And Caitlin, which our store manager, she came down to eat fish with us, which our farm shop is just right across the road from our store. So our store manager was there, and I'll remember she just started eating. We just serving plates. It's probably a little bit after 12, and she stood up and just obviously distressed and crying and on the phone. And that's when she got the call that Chance was shot. And of course, at that time, we didn't know accident. Like, we didn't know, is it accident? What happened? And then the more details come in, and then reports, and then, and for us, as things develop, and goodness, it's the negative part of social media that I just despise. As those things happen, everybody points fingers, and everybody, well, what about this or what about that? And I'm just like, I told our staff, I was like, listen, and even Seth, our marketing manager, I was like, we cannot get into the details of this case because we don't know. The only thing we can share is what is publicly available, what the district attorney says, from a law enforcement standpoint and investigative standpoint. That's the only thing you could say. And we're not investigators. We don't know. And so that, everything I've said today is been released in a sense from, preliminary investigation of what happened. And like I say, when the TBI report comes back out, and I'd encourage listeners to even research it, when it comes out. That way you'll have a little bit of a closure on it, and maybe the timeline of events will make sense, and all that. But just a tragic deal that from what I understand, a gentleman has hunted a location for a while that has some demons with dementia, and I'm assuming or mentally going on, that he can't control. And at the end of the day, you can't control that. And it just, something snapped, and it pushed him over the edge, and here we are.
It's just, there's a lot of lessons to take out of it, but we've all been there on public areas in hunt positions of somebody got there first in the deer woods, or somebody beat you to the hole on on a public area. It's not worth it. It's go make the day what it can. And we all got guns. We're dealing with heated situations and losing tempers with loaded firearms involved. And it's not good. It's not good to ever get into any kind of argument over a duck, go the next day and hunt them again. But it sounds like there's just a lot of buildup and and it finally comes down to this and the dementia and the mental issues. It's just sad. The moms, the dads, the sisters, the brothers, the nephews. It's terrible.
And from what I understand too, from the one survivor in it is, when it happened and, like he even said, he thought it was an accident. Like a gun goes off and it's like, you never think that, and I heard that. Now, granted, this, like I say, this is just me from what I've been told, but and all the details will come out in the investigation when it's finalized. But, if that happens, I could try to put myself in that shoes. Like, you're never thinking it's intentional. And I can tell you this, and I think take this to the bank, Chance. And I didn't know Zach as well, but I can tell you, Chance, like goodness, Chance was our firearm department manager. He's big in tactical firearms. Like, he is a very athletic. Like if he knew the threat was approaching, like he's going to be, he can protect himself. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, and that's just me saying that of knowing him. And the gentleman the suspect that died, was in his upper 70s as an older gentleman. And truthfully for him, there's no and this needs to be said, even with him, there's no history of violence. There's no criminal record, which it makes it even bizarre, well liked in the community, and then after this happened, there's people like, well, I've heard that he had some bad reports that, there's some early signs of dementia coming in. Like, so, and I don't know if that's confirmed, but it makes you wonder, like what, and it also should bring awareness to mental health issues. There's things that happen, and I don't know. Chad, it could have been me and you in there. And that's one thing to take away from this conversation. It very well could have been me and you or anybody listening, and there's not a single thing we could have done.
Nope. Sad. It's just, I wanted to touch on it today because I knew you had personal ties with your store, your company and your family and your friends and your employee, all this. Like, it's a big deal. And I just wanted to touch on it because I wanted to hear it from you of this. It's easy to put it in our back pocket and say, oh, that'll never happen to me, or I'm across the country and nothing's like that's going to, but there's people affected by this. And it's nice to see the industry come together. And man,
and I want to kind of sum that up to say this. I'm not in a position to talk about the investigation other than just what I've heard from the district attorney and what's publicly available. And I want to stress that as much as I can. I don't want rumors to spread. I don't know. Just go read the local papers and University of Tennessee and the TBI reports, and then you can, get the official investigation. The only reason I'm even willing to talk about it, and I was even hesitant to even talk to anybody about it before now, is because, I'm not qualified to. I don't know other than reading what's the press release. But at the end of the day, now that time's passed, you've seen some of the preliminary, reports from law enforcement and what they're saying, unless there's some crazy autopsy report that's unforeseen, it looks like this case is closed. So then you go with what you've been told. The only reason I'm even willing to talk about it is to share the legacy of Chance and Zach and who they were, what they were about. And I thought about it. I thought, if people hear Chance Black and Zach Grooms, in California, maybe that'll make their families happy, and if that's true, then I'm all in. Like, put me in, God, what can I do? Because that's my mission, and I know the hunting industry feels the same way. And I think that's why they've showed out with support, so whatever we can do, like this is, it's all about rallying around their families and showing them love and showing them support in this time. And that's the reason, that's the reason we're talking about it today.
Very well said, Kelley Powers. And I truly appreciate you coming on here. I would like to challenge you to come up with the next topic that we're going to talk about on the podcast. And you text me and say, I got one, but you got to come up with one. There's got to be something out there. Squirrel gravy, turkey hunting. It's getting ready to be turkey season. But let's talk about something coming up, Kelley. I appreciate you being here.
All right, man. That sounds good. Yeah, we'll do it. It's a lot of fun.
Kelley Powers, the man, Final Flight Outfitters. Today's episode of the Fowl Life Podcast, again, brought to you by our friends at Gerber Gear and Final Flight Outfitters in Tennessee. Check them out online. What's the website, Kelley Powers?
Finalflight.net.
Finalflight.net. Get on their mailing list, catalogs, online orders. What a community, what a culture. I remember when it first started, I remember how little, I think it was a 1-page or 2-page, little duck commander, little Tim Grounds in there, and it's grown into a monster. Kudos to the Powers family. They worked their butts off, and like Kelley said, they put faith, family, and the outdoors first in that order. And that's why they're successful, because they never forget where they come from. They're rooted in that part of Tennessee, and they take care of theirs and they take care of yours when asked to do so. That's why I always like to have Kelley on here. He's a positive influence in our space. Kelley, thank you, my brother.
Thank you, buddy. I love doing it anytime, man. A lot of fun.
All right, I'll be in touch with you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Fowl Life Podcast. Tom, Jake, hit that button. This song is called My Fowl Life by 2AM Logic.